mid-2000s, when they studied the wishbone of the Carcharodontosaurus, they saw that this animal might have deployed a system of air sacs. Now, air sacs are used in breathing. They make sure that oxygen-rich air flows continually through the lungs when breathing in and out. It's actually a very efficient system, similar to modern birds, and it implied that Carcharodontosaurus had incredible stamina, but they were also active hunters, and they needed to be, because a dinosaur of this size would have needed to eat about 60 kilos of meat every day simply to survive. And of course, while Carcharodontosaurus were deadly predators, they weren't really like you would expect, because their skull was shown to be relatively weak, and analysis of the stress level shows they were unable to hold on to struggling prey, because their teeth were thin like knives and can't bite easily through bone. But also, their teeth were sharp with deadly serrations, just like a shark's. In fact, the very name Carcharodontosaurus means shark-toothed lizard. Of course, we think that Carcharodontosaurus would have used its skull and teeth to slash deep into the flesh of its prey, which would cause a massive injury and blood loss. And then, all the Carcharodontosaurus would have to do is follow and wait for its prey to die. In 2008, a Spinosaurus vertebrae was recovered from Morocco, because part of the tall neural bone of the spine was broken off. Of course, it appeared that it was bitten in half, and it's been suggested the bite was inflicted by Carcharodontosaurus, because these guys lived around the same time as each other, and in times of hardship they might have gone against each other. Now, probably the least known of all dinosaurs, the Alaskan Troodon. Now, Troodon were found throughout the northern hemisphere, but these particular ones were found in Alaska, because in Alaska, in North America, evidence of predators like Tyrannosaurs became very scarce. And that's because these animals dominated Alaska. Now, Troodon might not look as lethal as a Tyrannosaur, but fossil evidence has suggested that these two were deadly predators, surviving entirely on a diet of meat. Now, Troodon were usually small 2-metre-high dinosaurs, but they were usually small 2-metre-long dinosaurs, probably came up to about up to my hip. But the teeth of the Alaskan Troodon has shown something remarkable, that these Arctic predators were twice as big as normal. The most common plant eater in Alaska was the highly sociable Edmontosaurus. Now, these were the largest duck-billed dinosaurs in North America, but the adults didn't really have anything to fear from a Troodon, because they were about 12 metres long and 3.5 tonnes, so they physically dwarfed this predator. However, Troodon not only survived in Alaska, they positively thrived. And that's because their hunting prowess came into its own after sunset. Because that's a land where after late summer there's more hours of darkness than light. Of course, two things that have always amazed me about Troodon is, firstly, they have the largest brain relative to their body size of any dinosaur. Another important adaptation are their eyes. Not only are their eyes forward-facing, which make them active hunters, but they're very, very large, which meant these guys had the advantage of night vision, so they could see in the dark. And of course, the Alaskan dinosaur bone beds are mostly dominated by the remains of juvenile Edmontosaurus, Many of them show clear signs of Troodon bite marks. I mean, it's shown that by exploiting the weaker juveniles, Troodon were able to survive the long Arctic winters and grew to be twice the size of their cousins further south. Now for another dinosaur that not many people know about, it is Majungasaurus. Now, Majungasaurus was a member of a group of dinosaurs called the Allosaurids. Now, the Allosaurids were the apex predators of the southern hemisphere during the Cretaceous period. They were sort of like the Tyrannosaurs of the south. Now, Majungasaurus lived in Madagascar about 75 million years ago. It was probably about 9 meters long and weighed about 3 tons. For many years, we believed that Majungasaurus was the top predator in Madagascar. But when some bones of Majungasaurus were found with bite marks, it suggested that there might have been a bigger and more brutal predator out there. Of course, from studying the shape of Majungasaurus' skull and teeth, it showed a very different bite-killing style to the flesh-tearing dinosaurs like Carnosaurs. It had a short, broad and muscular skull, so it was a dinosaur better adapted to biting and gripping rather than slashing its prey. But also, Majungasaurus had short arms and it couldn't grasp, and like Tyrannosaurs, it was all about the bites. And when the bite marks on the mauled Majungasaurus remains were studied more closely, the marks on the bones were actually shown that they were actually made by another Majungasaurus. And of course that matched the only large predator in the region. In fact, 75 million years ago, there was no bigger predator in Madagascar than Majungasaurus. This was the first indisputable evidence of dinosaur cannibalism. Now that might seem gross as well as shocking, but it's a behaviour that clearly shows even the most successful dinosaurs could exploit any situation to their maximum advantage. So if you were a Majungasaurus and were invited by a family member over for dinner, you would have been on the menu. Don't know why I did that. So sorry. Now for one of the most famous dinosaurs, Allosaurus. Now, Allosaurus was probably the first giant predator ever discovered. This Allosaurus was about 9 meters long, weighed 1.5 tons, had powerful clawed forearms and a lethal bite. The world had never known a predator like it. Allosaurus lived in North America around about 150 million years ago during the Jurassic Period, which was a time when the first giant predators stalked the Earth. It was first discovered in around about 1877. Now for many years, Allosaurus was thought to be a powerful predator with a lethal bite, but recent research has suggested that the Allosaurus's bite was surprisingly weak, because the section of the skull that joined the jaw muscles were not that big, so its bite wasn't really that strong. In fact, calculations have suggested its bite was less powerful than a lion's, despite being 8 times bigger. Although, you're probably all going to be wondering how this Jurassic beast hunted and killed. Of course, it's been suggested that Allosaurus was an ambush predator like a modern-day leopard, so it would have crept up on prey and then chased after it. In fact, Allosaurus probably ran at the same kind of speed as an Olympic sprinter, about just over 25 miles per hour. But despite the apparent weakness of its bite, Allosaurus actually did have a deadly killing method, because it's been shown that its skull could withstand a force more than 15 times as great as its bite, and where at the back of the skull, where the neck muscles join the skull, they were actually quite big, and it's been proven that Allosaurus might have used its head like an axe, using its strong neck muscles to drive its top jaw into its prey, and with every impact, its serrated teeth would tear through its prey's flesh. The victim would die through a combination of shock and blood loss. While it's not pretty or clinical, it was ruthlessly efficient. But as you can see here, an Allosaurus has been shown that it could have taken on Stegosaurus, which was the most heavily defended giant of the Jurassic. Of course, fossil evidence of these incredible animals discovered in 2005, I actually linked those two great animals in battle, because in 2005 a Stegosaurus backplate was discovered with a U-shaped bite taken out of it, a bite mark that fitted the jaws of the Allosaurus perfectly. But even more incredible was an Allosaurus vertebrae, because that had a massive impact wound that had been made by a Stegosaurus's thagomizer, the weapon at the end of its tail. The blow being so powerful, it punched a hole in the bone of the Allosaurus's spine. Even more amazing is that the injured bone showed signs of healing. So Allosaurus was a tough dinosaur, and it could survive a blow to the spine or having its jaw shattered. In fact, fossil evidence has shown it was a tough dinosaur. Now, next I'm going to show you all probably the most famous of all dinosaurs. The legend, that is, T-Rex. Now, this wouldn't be a proper dinosaur presentation without at least including the T-Rex. Now, T-Rex, or Tyrannosaurus rex, is the largest of the Tyrannosaur family, and it lived in what is now North America about 80 to 85 million years ago until about 65 million years ago in the late Cretaceous period. Now the T-Rex was about 12 metres long, weighed about 8 tons in weight, had an enormous bony skull with teeth that were a lot like lethal bananas. They were about 10 inches long and serrated like a shark's, but also T-Rex had probably the most powerful bite of any dinosaur. It could bite down with over 6 tons of pressure, and its bite was 10 times more powerful than a lion's. But also, in 2008, there was a debate about T-Rex being able to having a sense of smell that was very keen, and in that year, medical scanners looked into the brain cases of the tyrannosaurs, and they were shown that while their brain was quite small, it had the largest area devoted to smell of any dinosaur. But also, in the fossil records, T-Rex fossils have usually been found together. In fact, in Montana, where the largest amounts of T-Rex fossils are found, there's usually a collection of them, like adults and juveniles, all buried at the same place at the same time, which is a clue that they might have lived in groups like wolves and lions. And also, in the fossil records, T-Rex has been shown that they hunted Triceratops, the largest of the ceratopsians, but also Ankylosaurus and sauropods. But occasionally, T-Rex would be cannibalistic and would even eat one of their own, whether they've killed it or not.